to welcome our speaker.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And let me again extend a very warm welcome to this virtual audience on behalf of IISER Mohali and the Punjab State Council for Science and Technology. And as you know, 28th February holds a very special place in science history. It marks the discovery of the Raman effect. But more importantly, Science Day is now used as an occasion. Let me again extend a very warm welcome to this virtual audience on behalf of IISER Mohali. I heard my own feedback. Okay. So basically, Science Day, we just use the occasion now, not only to commemorate this path-breaking Nobel Prize-winning discovery, but also to just to convey the wonder and the excitement of digital science. And, we could not have asked for a better and more inspirational speaker to do that for us today, Professor Gadagkar. And I have always found that Professor Gadagkar's talks always manage to teach us a lot, articulate, the wonder and excitement of science in general to a broader audience, always remaining utterly enjoyable. So it's a very rare feat, and it's quite wonderful. We really look forward to his talk today. And so now I hand over back to my colleague, Professor Ecophiladelphia. He's also our Dean of International Relations and Outreach, and he will conduct the proceedings from now on and also introduce us as utterly enjoyable. So it's a very rare feat, and we really look forward to his talk today.
Okay, so welcome again to today's talk. The talk, before I formally introduce our today's speaker, a few details. The talk is expected to be about 45 minutes long. All the at the very end. To the colleagues on Zoom, all the people watching on Zoom, I have a request. Please mute yourselves. Okay? Please go on now and mute yourselves. Otherwise, there will be an echo and we won't be able to hear the talk clearly. Please mute yourselves. Okay. Thank you. Now it is an honor to introduce Professor Raghavendra Gadagkar. Professor Gadagkar obtained his BSc and MSc in zoology in Bangalore. He then went on to do a PhD in molecular biology from the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Legend has it that during his PhD time, doing molecular biology, he spent a lot of time watching wasps and wasp nests. And over the last 30 years, he has established an active school of research in the area of animal behavior, ecology, and evolution. The origin and evolution of cooperation in animals, especially in social insects such as ants, bees, and wasps, is a major goal of his research. And he has added a unique Indian flavor to his research by identifying and utilizing crucial elements in India's biodiversity. Professor Gadagkar has received many honors. He has many achievements to his credit. Professor Gadagkar has been the president of the Indian National Science Academy, New Delhi. He's an S.N. Bose Research Professor, a J.C. Bose National Fellow. He's been the chairman of the Center for Ecological Sciences and the Center for Contemporary Studies at Indian Institute of Science. He's been an honorary professor at Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research. And for us at IISER Mohali, it's a pride that he's also an honorary professor at our institution. He's the non-resident permanent fellow at the Wissenschaft College, Berlin. His research has been recognized by a number of awards, including the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize, B.M. Birla Science Prize, Homi Bhabha Fellowship, B.P. Pal National Environmental Fellowship in Biodiversity, the World Academy of Sciences Award in Biology, and H.K. Firodia Award. He is an elected member of all the National Science Academies of India. He is the Foreign Associate of the National Academy of Sciences, USA, and the German National Sciences Academy. He has been conferred the highest civilian award from Germany, the Cross of the Order of Merit, one of the very few people from India to be recognized in such a manner. I remember Professor Gadagkar saying in one of his interviews that he hopes that scientists could communicate like poets. He believes in practicing what he preaches. He is a wonderful communicator of science. And today he will speak to us about what insect societies can teach us. Professor Gadagkar. Sir, you are muted. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so both for Prasad and for Sudeshna, I heard everything that you said twice with a considerable time delay.
Oh.
So I hope my voice is not coming like that to you. Are you able to hear me? I hope you hear me only once.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear you only once.
Okay, so I heard myself being introduced twice. So,
yeah, we can hear.
But thank you very much. And if there is any problem with the
no, no. Actually, I can now hear you twice.
Same thing. I also had that.
Oh.
So I hope my voice is not coming like that to you. Are you able to hear me? I hope you hear me only once.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear you only once.
Okay, so I heard myself being introduced twice.
Yeah, we can hear.
But thank you very much. And if there is any
yeah, it's coming third time now.
Actually, I'm trying to figure out why this is the case.
I'm hearing you third time.
Nobody else seems to be.
Prasad, YouTube might be on at his end. If that is the case, he may have to mute.
That's one possibility, but only people who have something on. I'm trying to see whether anybody else has their.
Geeta says she doesn't have a problem. I'll check again.
I see very few people with mics on.
Right now it is okay, Prasad.
Right now it is only once.
Okay, but when you said I can hear you only once, that sentence I heard 3 times. So
okay. There's also a time delay, which makes me think that YouTube is on someone's.
Yeah, I think with a considerable time delay.
Yeah, that's YouTube. That's because of YouTube.
Okay, so maybe they should.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out. I think there are only few who have their mics on, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And right now it's only you and me.
Yes.
So now I'm going to try. Sir, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, I did.
Okay. Okay, maybe we start. If we have a problem, then I will tell you again. Right now it seems to be working.
Okay. Okay. So good morning, everybody. Especially the very young people in the audience that I saw. I'm delighted to have all of you in the audience. I'm very honored to be able to speak to you on this very important National Science Day in India. I begin by thanking Prasad and Sudeshna for this invitation. I'm going to speak on the topic, can we learn from insect societies? So do signal in some way if there's a problem with the audio or video. Before I come to the topic of can we learn from insect societies, let me give a brief introduction to insect societies. Already on this slide, you see 3 pictures. On the left side, you have a picture of an ant which builds its nests by digging a hole in the ground. You can see a few ants moving around the nest. This ant is called Diacama, and a fascinating feature about this ant is, as you can see, it covers the entrance of its nest and the surroundings with all kinds of objects, including feathers and dead bodies of other ants. And the reason why it does that is it uses these materials to collect dew which has fallen overnight, which does not get absorbed because these materials keep the water on them. And in the morning, the ants come and drink this water. So this is how they harvest dew for their water consumption. In the middle, you see a set of Apis dorsata, the rock bees. This is not a nest. This is a swarm of bees. And these are just bees hanging around here, waiting to find a new place to build a new home. And I'll have a lot more to say about house hunting in honeybees in this talk. On the right side, you see a picture of a social wasp, a paper wasp colony. This is Rhopalidia marginata. The middle honeybee was Apis dorsata. The left side was Diacama cironens, and this is Rhopalidia marginata. And I will have more to say about this wasp, because this is what I and my students study in my lab. So let me begin with a very brief introduction. What you see on the next slide, if there's a way I can go to the next slide. Okay, can you see the second slide, which has a honeybee comb? Okay, this is the Asian dwarf bee, Apis florea. This is an open nesting bee. So there are two kinds of honeybees, those that nest inside cavities and those that nest in the open. So Apis florea is one of those that nests in the open. This is a uniquely Asian bee. It is not found elsewhere in the world. And again, amongst honeybees, this is very special because it is considered a somewhat more primitive honeybee compared to the other honeybees. One very interesting detail is that while all the other bees dance on the vertical surface of the comb, this bee has to dance on the horizontal surface of the comb. And I'll come back and say a little bit more about the dance of the bees. What you see on the next slide is a close-up. This is Apis mellifera, the European honeybee. And what you see in the middle is a large queen surrounded by a group of workers. In honeybees, the queen is always large and you can easily identify her if you can find her in the colony, because there are 50, 60,000 bees in a colony. But the queen is usually surrounded by a group of workers. And these workers are, if you permit me to use a human term, they are on royal duty. Their job is to take care of the queen. They clean the queen, they lick the queen, they feed her. She has no time for these things. She's very busy. She's very busy eating and converting the food into eggs and laying eggs. She can lay thousands of eggs every day in the colony. So that's really her main job. In addition to that, she produces chemical substances, which we call pheromones. This she releases outside her body. They are volatile. And the workers then receive these chemicals, which helps them to regulate their own activities. And by being close to the queen, these workers gather these pheromones. Then they move out into the rest of the colony and pass it on to other individuals. What you see here is again a honeybee. This one is flying outside and it's hovering on top of a flower. Honeybees collect both pollen and nectar from their environment and take it back home because that is their food. They get their carbohydrates from nectar and their protein from pollen. These are the only two items of food, and these are the only two things they collect from the environment, but take it back. But once they go back, they are able to recruit, enlist a large number of bees from home who don't know that there is food there, who don't know where the food is, but they get them to help them to bring back the food. This they do by actually informing the bees at home what kind of food they have found, where they have found it, how far, and in what direction one should go to get that. And all this is communicated by means of a dance language. So the bees actually dance on the surface of the comb, and in this dance, there is information which the watchers of the dance get. And then without any further help from the dancer, they can go to that particular tree, which may be 5 kilometers away, and gather that nectar and pollen. And a German scientist called Carl von Frisch discovered that honeybees have such a dance language. And in fact, he got the Nobel Prize for this discovery in the year 1973. And I'll have a little bit more to say about the dance language of the honeybees. What you see here is a picture of a honeybee which has just stung somebody. Some of you may have been stung by honeybees. I have been stung many times. And here is a volunteer who has allowed himself to be stung by the honeybees for the purpose of photography. The photography has been made immediately after he was stung. And it turns out that when a honeybee stings you, it cannot withdraw its sting from your body because its sting has thorns which are pointing outwards. And the sting gets lodged into your body. When the bee tries to extract the sting, actually its abdomen breaks and it leaves behind the sting and the poison gland. So there is a sting here and there's a poison gland attached to that, and a part of its digestive system and nervous system are left behind on your body. The bee flies away only to die within a few minutes. But the poison gland, which is still on your body, continues to pump poison or venom into your body. And that is how the bees effectively sting you. So the bees have a very effective venom delivery mechanism, but at the cost to their own lives. So bees actually commit suicide in order to help the rest of the colony survive. And this is of great interest to people like us who study evolution. How does natural selection favor such altruistic, self-sacrificing behavior? The next slide, you see ants trying to build a nest. So this is the weaver ant Ecophilia. This particular one is Ecophilia longinoda from Africa. We have one species in India called Ecophilia smaragdina. And you see a large number of ants trying to bring two leaves close to each other. And when they succeed in doing that, they will actually stitch these two leaves with silk. You can see here that silk fibers are being used to stitch the leaves together, and that's how they make a nest. But the silk itself is not produced by the adult ants, but ant larvae can produce silk. So you see here an adult ant which is actually caught hold of a larva, and she's squeezing her and saying, please give us some silk so that we can build the nest. And using those silk fibers, the ants actually build those nests. Another example of insect societies, of course, are termites, which all of you would have seen. Termites are also highly social creatures. They have these mounds usually outside the nest, and under the ground, they have these elaborate colonies in which the queen termite as well as the king termite, they live there. In fact, this large individual is the queen, and this small individual next to her, if you can see that, is in fact the king. He's very small, but he's still the king. And they then produce lots of offspring, and these offspring, these young termites, actually begin to work for the colony even before they grow up. Even as children, they work for the welfare of the colony. Finally, a fourth example of insects societies or social insects is that of wasps. Many wasps are not social, but those that are social are called paper wasps. And the reason why they are called paper wasps is because they make their nest from paper. Honeybees make their nest from wax, ants make them from leaves, termites make them from soil, but wasps make them from paper. Where do they get paper from? They manufacture their own paper. And they manufacture paper in very much the same way that we would manufacture paper. They actually extract cellulose fibers from plants, chew it up, and make it into a thin pulp and dry it, spread it and dry it, and this is paper. You see here a whole nest covered with an envelope of paper, leaving only a small opening for the wasp to fly in and out. And if you open this, which is of course very dangerous to do, but if you are careful enough and you open this, you will see what I call a multi-storied apartment complex. So you have several layers of paper comb, and it is in this that they rear their young ones. What you see here, these white things are all the pupae. The larvae have become pupae, and the pupae have these silk caps, and from these adult wasps will come out. So I could go on telling you about many, many interesting things about insect societies, but instead let me just summarize the important features of insect societies. Insect societies, as you already have seen, resemble human societies in many ways and are arguably more efficient than ours in some ways. Insect societies sustainably harvest environmental resources, something that we are struggling to do, not quite successful. They engineer their environments both inside and outside their nest, just as we do. They practice agriculture, just as we do. They fight disease both with a combination of both individual immunity, which we use, as well as social immunity. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, many of you may have heard the word herd immunity. The social immunity of insect societies goes well beyond herd immunity. They actually have social mechanisms of fighting disease. Then they organize, of course, themselves into social hunting parties. They navigate their environment using both terrestrial as well as celestial cues. They can look at the position of the sun. They can put a position of various landmarks. They can also look at the position of the stars and the moon and the Milky Way, and all of that they can use in order to help them to navigate. And over evolutionary time, over last 50, 60, 70,000 million years, they have actually influenced the course of evolution of other organisms, in particular that of flowering plants. The evolution of flowering plants has been majorly influenced by bees, because bees and flowers or flowering plants have entered into a partnership. The flowering plants provide food to the bees, and bees provide pollination services to the plants. So the question arises, if they are so smart, if they can do all of these things, can we humans learn anything from insect societies? This is an obvious question that we should be asking, and I will try and answer this question today to some extent. Yes, we must admit that there are difficulties. Although it is very tempting to learn and copy and imitate from insect societies, there are difficulties. Interestingly, these difficulties are not so much because of them, but much more because of us. And I will try and illustrate what this means, but I will try to answer this question, can we learn? First, there is a practical problem in learning from insect society. And the practical problem is this. We find everything in nature, not just in insect societies, in nature, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You will find that examples in nature to justify whatever you want. We can find suitable examples in nature to justify anything. Monarchy, if you want, sure, there is an example. Slavery, there are examples. Murder, there are examples. Matricide, fratricide, infanticide, siblicide. Or if you are a different kind of person, you want democracy, there are examples. Socialism, yes. Egalitarianism, altruism, self-sacrifice, whatever, the good, the bad, ugly, for everything you have examples in nature. And therefore, there is a philosophical problem. The philosophical problem is called naturalistic fallacy. Now, let me define what naturalistic fallacy is. Naturalistic fallacy is the tendency to draw a conclusion about how things ought to be. What should we be doing? Based on claims concerning what is natural, as if naturalness were itself a kind of authority. Now, you can see the problem with this. If I want to justify democracy, I say, look, there is democracy in bees, so we should be democratic. But if I want to justify murder, I can say, look, the ants murders, even the bees murder, so it's okay that I murder. So we cannot simply use what is in nature to justify what we are doing. And if we do that, we will be in a lot of trouble, as we have been in the past. And this is what is called naturalistic fallacy. So people have warned that we should be very careful. We should not commit the naturalistic fallacy. We should not blindly imitate nature, and we should not simply justify what we are doing, saying that, oh, it was already done by animals. That should not be done. So this is a serious problem, and we should keep that in mind. But in response to this, some philosophers have said, therefore, we should forget nature, and we should simply not look at nature. This I do not agree, and we need to do something more. And my question is, can we hope to learn from insect societies without committing the naturalistic fallacy, without actually this problem? And let us start with some easy examples, where non-controversial examples. So I'll take 3 or 4 examples. There is a branch of computer science called ant colony optimization. This all began very recently, as recently as 1989, when a Belgian scientist called Jean-Louis Deneuber did an interesting experiment to ask, if the ants have two ways to reach food, one is a long path, one is a short path, then they will always choose the short path. So here, for example, in the beginning, they're all randomly doing, but later on you can see they will take the shortest path to go from the nest to the food. And the question is, how do they do that? How do they choose the shortest path? He discovered how they did that. And based on learning from this, based on imitating them, this whole branch of computer science has developed. At that time, again, a Belgian computer scientist called Marco Dorigo, he actually developed a science and he's written a book called Ant Colony Optimization. And the principles that are actually copied from ants, imitated from ants, are now used for solving several human problems, including the traveling salesman problem, routing in communication networks, algorithms for data clustering, dynamic resource sharing, graph coloring, machine scheduling, vehicle routing, sequence learning, machine learning. In all of these, we are learning from ants how to do these things well. And you can see this is relatively non-controversial. Let me take a different example. I already mentioned that ants practice agriculture. So some species of ants and some species of termites actually practice agriculture, which is very similar to our agriculture. In the case of ants, they have been much better studied. They actually grow fungi, they grow mushrooms, and they maintain large gardens of mushrooms, and they harvest these mushrooms and they eat the spores. So they collect seeds, fungus farming ants we call them. They originated 50 million years ago, and they use leaves to cultivate fungi. Our agriculture is 10,000 years old. Their agriculture is 50 million years old. They have perfected the art of agriculture, and there's a great deal we can learn from them. Amongst the many things we can learn from them, perhaps the most important thing, which is the result of a study by a man called Ulrich Müller and many others after him in the University of Texas, where he showed, and his group showed, that they choose and manage microbial consortia, which are beneficial both for nutrient uptake and for disease resistance. And he and his colleagues have said that this is one area in which we really can learn to manage our agriculture. At this point, I want to inform you and I want to recognize that in our midst, there is one person who actually was part of this research. This is Dr. Ruchira Sen, who is now assistant professor in Guru Gobind Singh College, Chandigarh. She was part of this study, and here I have quoted a paper from her, which was published in PNAS in 2009. So you have amongst you an important scientist who has actually contributed to our understanding of ant agriculture and how we can use this for our own agriculture. These are also relatively non-controversial examples. Then there is also a relatively non-controversial example in robotics. A man called Mandyam Srinivasan in Australian National University studied how honeybees know how far the food is. I already told you, they come back and they tell the bees at home how far they have to fly to get the food. But how do they know how far they have flown? So he showed by means of a very simple and very clever experiment that honeybees can measure the amount of image motion on their eyes. This is called optic flow. How much image has gone past your eyes? Based on that, they estimate how far they have gone. For example, if you are traveling in a train, if you look at how many or how fast the lampposts are going by, you can get an idea of how far you have gone. He discovered that, and using that, now this is being applied. So flying insects are intelligent micro machines capable of exquisite maneuvers in unpredictable environments. Understanding these systems advances our knowledge of flight control, sensory suites, and in unsteady aerodynamics, which is of crucial interest to engineers developing intelligent flying robots and micro air vehicles. So lessons that we learn from bees are extremely useful in these kinds of applications. But these are easy, non-controversial examples, but I want to now move on to more difficult examples. What do I mean by difficult? Not difficult to apply, not difficult to learn, but danger of committing the naturalistic fallacy. Danger is very serious here because now I'm talking about human affairs and moral philosophy. Here I will take two kinds of examples where we can potentially learn from insect societies. One is from our own work. This is Rhopalidia marginate. I already showed you a picture of this. I and many of my students have been studying the social life of this wasp for many years now. And we have discovered many things about this. I will give you a bird's eye view of a few facts that we have discovered. Like in the honeybee, this is a social insect. There is a queen and there are workers. There is no king. In ants, bees, and wasps, there are no kings. Only in termites there are kings. But the difference between honeybees and these wasps is that in the honeybee, the queen is a large individual. You can immediately recognize her. She is different from others, and she cannot become a worker, and a worker cannot become a queen. The interesting thing about this society is it's much more democratic. All the wasps look identical. There is one queen, but you can't tell who she is. She looks like everybody else. You have to patiently wait and see her lay eggs. She's the only one who will lay eggs. And then you can identify her, not by looking at her. She looks the same. And because they are all same, a queen can lose her status and become a worker. A worker can get promoted to become a queen. And as you can see, this is a much more interesting kind of society for us to study and much more tempting for us to copy, much more appealing for us. A few facts about these that we have discovered over many years. First thing we discovered, okay, now the main reason why we are able to study these things so carefully is that we can mark every individual wasp with unique spots of colored paint, and we give a name to each wasp, and we have a computer file for each wasp. So over the weeks and months, we have full data, full information about all of these wasps. Unfortunately, they don't worry about their privacy, so we get their data and we have it in our computer, and we know what each individual does. This is really the most important technique that we use in order to study them. So we find that these wasps are really so much like humans. So here, as I said, a queen can be overthrown and a worker can become a queen. And you can actually see this in real time. So in one study we did, we found that there was a queen, I called her Queen 1, and after some time she was replaced by her daughter, who became the next queen. But the daughter was replaced after some time by her sister. That sister was replaced by another sister. And this Queen 4 was replaced by her niece, which is Queen 5. Queen 5 niece was replaced by another sister of hers, another sister. But Queen 7 was replaced by her cousin, Queen 8. So you can see they have a very complex society. And because of such queen replacements or queen turnovers in a colony, you can find that new queens can be the new queen can be the daughters of old queens. They can be the sisters, they can be the nieces, and they can be the cousins of old queens. And therefore, when individuals live in a colony, they can be sisters of each other, brothers, nieces and nephews, cousins, cousins' offspring, mother's cousins' offspring, and even mother's cousins' grandchildren. This is the kind of complex society in which they live. And I'm very fond of saying that they will put to shame any Indian joint family. This is the kind of society in which they live and in which they play their games of conflict and cooperation, of democracy and of politics. All of this can be studied very easily if you have a lot of patience and if you have good questions in mind. In one early study, we showed that in each wasp, there are three kinds of individuals. We call them castes, we call them behavioral castes. So there are sitters, fighters, and foragers. And most interestingly, the queen is a non-aggressive, non-interactive, meek and docile sitter. She is not a fighter. She is not an aggressive individual, which is true in other societies. So this society is quite unusual in that the queen is a very mild and docile individual. And yet she manages to control the rest of the colony. But removal, if you go and experimentally remove this docile queen, then one of the workers becomes hyper-aggressive. And this one will become the next queen. So when she becomes hyper-aggressive, we call her a potential queen. She is the one who is going to become the next queen. And that's how we study these things. But interestingly, this hyper-aggressive individual will very quickly lose all her aggression. She will herself become meek and docile before she lays her first egg, before she becomes the next queen. We were very interested in knowing whether we can identify who this potential queen is. And I'm describing to you work of many of my students. And here, for example, several of my students undertook a detailed study to see if we can predict who the next queen will be. There's a train passing by here, which I will pause for a minute before this. Okay, so it turns out that we cannot predict who the next queen will be. So there is always a potential queen, but we can only identify her after we remove the queen. We cannot predict her because she is not unique in any way. We cannot see that. However, another set of my students showed that even though we don't know who the queen, the wasps themselves seem to know. There is a hair designate, we call her, even though we cannot identify her in the presence of the queen, and the wasps seem to know who she is. And therefore, because of that, they are able to minimize conflict because they already know who the next queen is. So if the queen were to die, they don't then sort of have a scramble competition. They don't fight and there is no chaos because it's already decided who the next one will be. And before she dies, it's already decided who the next one will be. And so you can see they are maintaining a very cooperative society. And yet, they can show a great deal of conflict and aggression if they come across members of other colonies. So while there's a great deal of intra-group peace, very little intra-group conflict, there can be a great deal of intergroup conflict. In fact, we also have studied intergroup conflict. And one of the experiments we did to study this was we brought wasps from one colony and introduced them into the cage of another colony. So when the members of one colony were introduced into the cage of another colony, young aliens, let me call them aliens, these are from another colony. The young aliens were admitted freely. Come and join my nest, no problem, you're welcome. But the older workers were not allowed to join. You can live in a corner somewhere, you can stay in the corner of the cage, but don't come near my nest. And the queen amongst the alien colony was not even allowed to live in the corner. She was located and literally torn to pieces. So you can see that all that cooperation they have towards other wasps in their colony breaks down, and they have very complicated, very sophisticated way of showing their conflict to outsiders. Why do I say sophisticated? Because they are not simply killing all outsiders. They are distinguishing. You are a young outsider, come and join me. You are an old outsider, but you are a worker, you can live somewhere. You are an old outsider and you are a queen, I will kill you. So they have a very complicated way of dealing with these situations. So there is in fact war and peace. There is peace at home and war with outsiders. So the wasps have a great propensity to make war with outsiders and an equally great propensity to make peace with insiders. From an evolutionary point of view, war with outsiders is easy to understand because war with outsiders is not of much use if you're also having war inside. If you cannot have peace inside, what is the use of warring with outsiders, right? So it is this dual strategy, this ability of the wasp to tread a fine balance between cooperation that accounts for social insects are the most successful animals on the planet. And in fact, we call them superorganisms. And because of this is because they have this balance between cooperation and conflict. Impossible for us not to reflect on ourselves when we learn all these things. And we ask ourselves, we humans are the same, aren't we? We try to maintain peace inside, war with outsiders. I'm reminded of a philosopher, Voltaire, who made a very interesting statement. He said, it is lamentable that to be a good patriot, one must become the enemy of the rest of mankind. Or love for mankind or patriotism, somebody has said, stops at the border. It should stop at the border. So we are very, very similar to them. There's some disturbance happening.
There's a background noise. I'll just try and handle that. Participants, please mute yourselves. Please mute yourselves. Please mute yourself. Okay, sir, you can continue.
I will unmute.
Yeah,
yes.
Sorry. Yeah.
I will disobey you, Prasad, and I will unmute.
Please.
Okay. But are you able to hear me? Otherwise, it's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what Voltaire said, and this inevitably makes us think about ourselves. Now, people, when I give such talk, people always ask, what can we learn from insect societies in this context? I'm very careful because I'm very worried about the naturalistic fallacy. And I'm very cautious, and I only say the following. I say, oops. People often ask me, why do you study wasps? And my answer is, for the same reason that anthropology studies humans. I certainly do not think that we should imitate animal society blindly, but I do think that they can hold a mirror to us and offer us a means to reflect on our own society. Just now I said we looked at intra-colony conflict, intra-colony peace, and inter-colony conflict in the Wasp, and we were reminded of War and Peace. We were reminded of what Voltaire says. So they can hold a mirror to us to understand ourselves. We should imitate them, but we can learn more about ourselves by studying them. Just as anthropologists study all kinds of exotic societies, not to imitate them, but to understand ourselves better. So I'm very cautious, I stop here. But today I want to ask, can we do even better? Can we become a little bit bolder? I hope that we can find a middle ground so that we can learn from insect societies without suffering the ill effects of the natural fallacy. We can actually imitate them, but without suffering the ill effects of the natural fallacy. Can we do that? This is my prescription. This is how I think we can try to do that. First, let us always decide what we wish to do on our own, unmindful of whether we find it in nature or not, whether animals do it or not. We don't care what they do. We will decide what we want to do. Once we decide what we want to do, independently of whether that is seen in nature, then we should turn to nature. Having made a decision, however, it is often useful to turn to nature to learn how to do it well. And here, I've talked about the non-controversial example. Let me now talk about a somewhat more controversial example. Now here I will give one example, and that is the example of honeybees. In fact, this is based on a book called Honeybee Democracy. In fact, the Honeybee Society has been described as a democracy and has been compared with human democracy. And in fact, Professor Thomas D. Seeley from Cornell University, who has written this book, who has spent a lot of his time working on honeybee democracy, has very specific prescriptions of how we can actually imitate honeybees to run our democracies better. And I will take the next few minutes to describe this. Now, honeybee democracy happens in one context, and that is the context of bees finding a new home. Now, the interesting thing about honeybees is every colony consists of a single queen and a very large number of workers. When they have to make a new colony, they first produce a new queen. But two queens, mother queen and daughter queen, cannot usually coexist in the same nest. And therefore, one of them has to leave, and that's how you will get two colonies from one colony. Two queens, they leave. Now, the interesting thing in honeybees is that it is almost always the mother who leaves with some of the workers to build a new nest, and the daughter inherits the rest of the workers, the comb, the wax, the honey, the pollen. She inherits, and she starts her own career in the old nest. The mother leaves. Mother leaves with a group of bees. Having gone there, having left the nest, here, for example, is a picture of honey. This is Apis mellifera.
Your voice is double.
Yes. Sorry? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
This is a pic. These are again like our Apis cerana. Apis mellifera is a.
Your voice is not clear.
My voice is not clear?
Well, actually, the voice is fairly clear here. It might be some local connectivity problems.
Okay. I'll try and speak. Okay. So this is actually Seeley has cut open the front side, and you can see the bees are nesting inside. There is a little opening here, and I will show you a close-up of the opening. This is what the opening looks like. So bees like to nest in these cavities. And when they have to make a new colony, they'll go out and settle in a place. For example, that's here. This is Professor Thomas Seeley, and he's actually studying these. These wasps settle down in a place called the swarm. In the swarm, there is the old queen, the mother queen, and some of the workers. Now, this is not their nest. They're just temporarily settled here. From here, they will have to find a suitable cavity of this kind to build a new home. So a few bees from the swarm, which are called scout bees, they will go in different directions and look for suitable cavities. And Celia and others have done many experiments show that the bees are very, very finicky about choosing the cavity they want. They will measure the volume of the cavity, they'll measure its height from the ground, they'll measure the possibility of sunlight, possibility of water coming in, possibility of draft coming in. They'll measure many, many things, and they will then decide which one to go. But these scouts will visit many different sites, and the scouts will return to the swarm, and they will inform the other bees what kind of cavity they have found or where it is. And this they will do using the same dance language that the foragers use to inform about food. So just like we mark our wasps, Celia and other honeybee researchers also mark their bees so that every individual bee can be identified. So you know bee number 31 has found a cavity in that corner and bee number 43 has found somewhere else. So this can be studied. So to summarize this, house hunting honeybees. When a daughter colony is produced, the mother queen leaves her nest with a fraction of the workers to build a new nest. The mother queen and her entourage of workers first settle in a cluster nearby and may remain there sometimes for a few hours, sometimes for several days. Why several days? Because they are not able to decide. They are not able to come to a conclusion. From this swarm, a few scout bees will fly out in search of suitable cavities to build a new nest. Multiple scouts will advertise different sites. Now, there's a very interesting problem here. When many foragers go in many different directions and advertise many different flowering trees, no problem. Some bees will go to this tree, some will go to that tree, and they'll bring nectar and pollen from all the trees. But now all the bees have to go to a single new place. And if 6, 7, 8, 10 scouts are saying, I have found a cavity there, I have found a cavity here, I have found a cavity there, they can't all go to these places. So they have to decide which is the best of all of these. That is where decision making comes in. That is where democracy comes in. But the bees all have to go to the same place and they have to choose hopefully the best one on offer. How they accomplish is no mean task. And Celia has described this in the following words. These homeless insects will do something truly amazing. They will hold a democratic debate to choose their new home. And he has described the process of this democratic debate. And I will summarize it very briefly. Here is a schematic. So for example, here is a swarm on the top picture. And you see there's one red dance here where one bee is indicating this cavity on the left and this one is indicating this cavity on the right. And very slowly you will see that the number of blue dances, that is to the right side, increase. The red ones drop off. Ultimately, most of them prefer the blue, which is to the right, and they will all go here. This cavity will not be used. This is a schematic. But here is some real data that Celia has presented in his book. So this is a very interesting democratic debate that lasted 3 days, 20th July, 21st July, 22nd July. On 20th July from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scouts advertising 6 different places. Then from 11 to 3 p.m. on the same day, you can see that some of them dropped out, some new ones came in. The debate goes on and on, 5 to 7 p.m. Then on the following day, you can see that the number has come down and there are really 2 contenders, B and G. They seem to be the main contenders, but they are still equally strong. And by 9 to 11 on 21st July, this G is becoming stronger, but B is not gone. But here you can see B is become weaker, and here everybody prefers this G and everybody goes to the side G. So this process has happened over 3 days. How has it happened? Once this is reached, of course, once G is decided, the scout who had found G, those scouts will actually lead the entire group to the particular cavity, and they will do this by performing piping sounds here, say, come with me. And after reaching there, they will release a pheromone saying, this is the place where you have to land to. Now, how does this happen? This is what we call collective decision making. The strength of the dancers is proportional to their assessment of the absolute quality of the site. Every scout make an assessment. How good is my quality? And they do not boast saying my quality is very good, my cavity is very good because I found it. They have an absolute criteria, and they will dance according to that. If I found what I think is a really good cavity, then I will dance many, many times. Whereas if I have found a reasonably good quality, I will dance at times. So the strength of the dance, meaning number of times they dance, is strictly correlated with the quality of what they have found. A good site will then elicit, so other bees are watching this dance, and if a strong dance, many will watch it, and they will also go and see that cavity. They will also think it's very good. They will also come and make strong dances. So a good site will elicit a strong dance and result in more dance followers who will visit that site and return to perform even more strong dances. On the other hand, a poor site will elicit a weak dance, result in fewer followers who will visit that site and return to perform weak dances. And therefore, you can see the number of bees that will dance in favor of the good and poor sites will increase and decrease exponentially. Once a consensus is reached, scouts who are most familiar with the winning side invite and lead the whole group to their new home by making piping sounds at the swarm and releasing pheromones at their destination. So by this method, they have not only come to a consensus, but they have chosen the best site. Sometimes they take as much as 3 days in order to make sure that they go to the best site. They give a chance to every scout saying, you tell us what you have, we'll go and inspect it, and then they make the final decision. Now, from this, we can extract wisdom. From Seeley's description, there are two things I liked very much about honeybees, and I'm calling them honeybee wisdom. First is their decision is based by attaining a quorum and not on a consensus. Consensus means everybody has to agree. That is a problem with consensus, because it means that a single stubborn bee cannot hold the group to ransom, endlessly delaying decision. So quorum is a much better way than actually consensus. And we know from our human experience how often it has been a problem where there is one stubborn person refusing to yield and the entire group's decision is being delayed. And we also know that when we use quorum, how much easier it is to make a decision. So this is a piece of wisdom that I think is very, very interesting. The second one is even more interesting. In the second wisdom is that bees whose initial sites fall out of favor retire from the competition and let others decide whether to persist in advertising for their site. If you don't like my site, so be it. I will not take it personally, take it a matter of prestige and keep on saying my site is better than yours. I go, I see, I dance with my strength, which is corresponding to the quality, then I let the others decide. If the others don't like it, no problem. So these two qualities together, I think, are extremely interesting, useful. Now, Seeley has gone a step further and has actually compared this very specifically to human democratic decision. Now, he doesn't start with parliamentary elections, he starts with town meetings. And this is a very interesting section of his book. Once a year, on town meeting day, traditionally the Tuesday following the first Monday in March, the citizens in a town come together in an open face-to-face assembly and render binding collective decisions or laws that govern the actions of everyone. This is what happens in the town meetings. And he has looked at how these town meetings function and he has compared them to honeybee societies. And comparing honeybee decision-making and decision-making in the town meetings, human democracy, he has come up with what he calls 5 habits of effective groups. What are these 5 habits? Compose the decision-making group of individuals with shared interests and mutual respect. Minimize the leader's influence on the group thinking. That is a very important thing. If the leader is going to finally make all the decisions, then you don't need a group. Seek diverse solutions to the problem. Initially, the bees allow every scout to advertise its town. Seek diverse solutions to the problem, but aggregate the group's knowledge through debate and use quorum response for cohesion, accuracy, and speed. So 5 effective habits of people drawn both from bees and from humans compose the decision-making group of individuals with shared interests and mutual respect, minimize leaders' influence, seek diverse solutions, aggregate the group's knowledge, and use quorum. Now, Seeley has done something very much more, even more charming. He says that when he studied all of this, at that time, he was made the chairman of his department. And he had to chair departmental meetings. And he said he tried his best to incorporate these and to actually chair departmental faculty meetings using these principles. There's a wonderful section in the book to discuss this. And so as if this were not charming enough, Seeley tells us how he himself adopted these 5 habits of affirmative groups in conducting faculty meetings in his department when he became chair of the Department of Neurobiology and Behavior at Cornell University in Ithaca. Therefore, I think it is wrong to say there is a danger of naturalistic fallacy, so we'll forget about nature. I don't think we can do that. Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are over 10 million biological species out there, each with potentially something to teach us. Natural selection has worked tirelessly for over 1.8 billion years to shape them, and we are just one of them. Shape them and us, and endow them with diverse and exquisite properties. Edward O. Wilson has coined the inspiring term biophilia to describe our innate tendency to focus on life and life-like processes. This is innate in us. We can't shut ourselves out of this. So we have to find a way of keeping this and not committing the naturalistic fallacy. Humanity, a quote from Wilson's Biophilia, humanity is exalted not because we are so far above other living creatures, but because knowing them well elevates the very concept of life. Humanity is exalted not because we are so far above other living creatures, but because knowing them well elevates the very concept of life. And so we cannot throw away nature. There is no corner to hide outside nature. We are part of nature. Some philosophers have said, let's forget nature, let's do our own thing. There is no corner, there is no safe corner for us. We are part of nature. Do we really want to be so against nature that we shut ourselves in a corner and ignore all other species as potential sources of knowledge and wisdom? Just because we are afraid that someone will draw the wrong lessons and harm fellow human beings? It would not behove the most intelligent species on the planet to be so terrified of what we might discover about our cohabitants. Let us have the self-confidence to raise our children to love fellow human beings and the rest of nature in equal measure, and have the sapience to distinguish right from wrong. And this is my prescription. Let this then be our resolve for the National Science Day. I want to come back to the National Science Day for a minute. Science is not just a body of facts. Science is a method of discovering and verifying facts. Science is best practiced as a way of life, not merely as a 9-to-5 occupation. Above all, science is more fun than fun. And that is what I want to tell the young people here. And therefore, on this National Science Day, let us spread the joy and spirit of science. In an attempt to do this, I have started writing a fortnightly column called More Fun Than Fun. And in fact, this particular lecture today is based on my latest article in this column, which you will find at this link in the Science Wire magazine. So let us all celebrate the National Science Day by realizing what science is, by making it a way of life, by not being afraid of nature, by having the confidence to distinguish good from bad, and spreading the joy and spirit of science, especially to the young people whom I see on my screen. It has been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Gadagkar. That was a fascinating talk, as always. Thank you so much. Okay, we will now open the talk for some questions. I'm sure there will be lots, but here is my request. For all my friends on Zoom, please use the raise hand feature and we will let you ask questions one by one. Please do not unmute yourself and start asking the question, then we will not be able to take questions, okay? So please raise your hand and we will let you ask questions one by one. For our friends who are watching on YouTube, you can type your questions in the comment section. We'll pick it up from there and we'll try and ask Professor Gadagkar as many questions as we can, okay? Okay, so it is now open. And those of you who cannot raise your hands on Zoom, you can type in your questions in the chat section, okay? So, sir, here is the first question.
Maybe I should unshare the screen now, right?
So,
And it's easier that way. Okay.
yes. So here is the first question from Richa. In case of Rhopalidia marginata, how does the present potential queen know about the future potential queen? I want to know what character of future potential queen shows from which the present queen can identify her. So are there markers for a future queen?
I don't know who is asking this question, but there is a vacancy for a PhD position in my lab, because this is an open question which needs to be answered. So you are most welcome to come and try. In fact, this has been a major question that we've been trying to ask for many years. And frankly, we are surprised and in some ways proud of the Wasps. Till today, we cannot predict who the potential queen is. We have not discovered these markers, but they know. And that is what I find very charming. The Wasps clearly know who their next queen is, and we yet, as of today, cannot find out. But, young people are capable of incredible things. I'm hoping that some new student will come and actually discover these things.
So the second question is, in the identification of alien wasps, specifically their social status,
yes,
is it pheromone dependent?
Okay, so this is our preliminary understanding. This is not final, but we know two things. We know that the wasps have on their body so-called cuticular hydrocarbons. And from these cuticular hydrocarbons, recognition is possible, both of nestmates and non-nestmates, aliens and locals. That distinction can be made. Also, distinction can be made whether an individual is a fertile queen or a sterile worker. We don't quite know how they know about young and old, but we suspect that the young have almost no smell. So using mainly the cuticular hydrocarbons, but also the behavior, I think the wasp can recognize both our own and foreign, as well as young versus old, fertile versus infertile. But this is our preliminary knowledge. A lot more work needs to be done on this.
Okay. There is a question from Pritish. Pritish, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
Sir, my question is that why insects comb has hexagon cells?
Very good question. So we can ask actually two questions. Why does it have hexagonal cells, and how do they manage to make such perfect hexagonal cells? Now, you would be interested to know that both these questions have been the topic of discussion for a very long time amongst biologists, amongst entomologists, amongst philosophers, amongst engineers. So we are beginning to understand first why hexagonal cells. It turns out that a hexagon is the best way to optimally divide space on a two-dimensional surface without wasting anything. Think if you put a lot of circles together, there will be gaps in between, which will be a waste. If you put a lot of squares together or triangles together, there will be no space, there will be no wastage, but the corners will be very narrow. And a larva is a cylinder. So this triangle or a square is not the appropriate container to put a cylinder. Now, hexagon comes closest to a circle, but does not waste space. So if you actually make a set of hexagons, you don't waste any space. And that means you don't waste any wax. So this is approximately the answer to this. But there's a bigger question of how do they actually manage to do that? And that is a much more complicated thing.
So Siddharth has a question. His question is, in case of Rhopalidia marginata and intercolony conflict, you said that the alien queen is quickly attacked and dismembered. But if the host colony's queen is killed or replaced, will the wasp accept an alien queen to be their potential queen?
No. The wasp would not accept alien queen. They will still kill her, because as long as they have workers, many of their workers are capable of replacing the original queen and becoming the next queen. So they will not accept an alien queen, even though they don't have a queen of their own. The interesting thing about this society is it's almost impossible to create a queenless state, because if you remove the queen, within half an hour, the next queen takes charge. And so there is almost never a queenless situation. And I don't think till the last queen dies, they will accept a foreign queen. However, when a colony is very small, foreign queens can come and force themselves, come inside, attack and kill this queen and take over the colony. This happens with very small colonies. But in large colonies, if the workers are strong, they will always resist a foreign queen.
So Anushka has a question. Anushka, do you want to ask it yourself? Anushka?
Maybe she's muted.
So Anushka wants to know, Anushka, by the way, is 4 years old.
Okay.
He wants to know, how do these insects make holes in their nest?
Well, they have very strong mandibles and they can chew in soil, they can chew in wood, they can chew in wax. They're very strong mouth parts, very strong mandibles, and they can chew. Many of them dig deep tunnels under the ground, excavate soil. So they're very strong mandibles and they can usually do a very good job with that.
Well, she also hopes that you're coming to Mohali so that you can show her various things here.
Absolutely. As soon as coronavirus permits, I will be there.
Kaushik has a question. How are the bees and wasps color coded? How do you observe them?
Okay. So we actually use a quick drying non-toxic paint. This paint is actually manufactured for the use of children who paint their hobby aeroplanes and hobby cars. So it's been manufactured with great care, so it's not toxic, it doesn't smell, it dries very quickly. And we use this and we put little spots on the bodies of the wasps. But I must tell you that we do not catch the wasp, we do not anesthetize it. We actually wait patiently till the wasp is very busy doing something, and then we put a spot of the appropriate color in the appropriate part of the body as we want on these wasps. My students are real experts in doing this, and I showed you one picture where more than 100 wasps had been marked. Each had a unique kind of pattern, and each wasp has a name which we then have in our computer. In the case of honeybees, sometimes what people do is they actually glue on the thorax of the bee a disc with a color and a number. But there they actually have to catch the bee, anesthetize the bee, and then they glue with super glue. They have these small discs, and therefore they have color and number combination. But we don't really need to disturb the wasp at all. With some patients, we can mark hundreds of wasps. We observe them mostly with the naked eye. Very soon my students quickly learn how not to get stung. You don't make jerky movement, don't breathe too hard on them, don't eat too much onion and garlic, and don't wear perfume, and then the wasp will be very friendly and you can actually sit watch them. Sometimes we make videos of them and we replay the video at slow speed in order to catch some behavior that happen very fast. But most of the time we watch manually and we take down notes manually.
Karthikeya has a question. On what basis is the successor queen chosen? And what will happen if we take out that pre-nominated successor just before the older queen dies or just after the queen dies?
Okay, so I will answer this question indirectly. We haven't done this experiment. We have done another experiment which will answer your question. One of my students identified the queen and removed her. Within an hour or so, he was able to identify the potential queen, which he called it potential queen number 1. And even before she became a queen and laid eggs, within that 1 hour, because he was sure who she is, he removed her. One of the remaining workers became a potential queen, which he called potential queen 2. Immediately he removed her. We had a potential queen 3. Immediately he removed her. We had a potential queen 5. So there is a whole queue of individuals standing in line, waiting for their turn. So there is no danger. Minimize the danger of outsiders coming and taking over your colony. But the interesting thing to remember is that they rarely jump the queue. They rarely come out of turn. They wait patiently for their turn. When it's turn for PQ1, PQ2 does not attack PQ1, does not challenge PQ1. That is the most interesting.
Okay, here is an interesting question. This is from Jaydeep. He's a master's student. Okay. Your prescription to learn about natural societies and then pick and choose from these models seems to base it on the notion that we can actually distinguish between right models and wrong models? Isn't that a very subjective selection process? How do you combat that?
So let me remind you what I said. I said my prescription started by saying, let us decide by ourselves without turning to insect models or any other models, without worrying about whether they do it or not. What do we want to do? Do we want a democracy? Do we want an autocracy? Let us decide. Once we decide how to have a good democracy, there are insect models which will tell you. How to have a good autocracy, also there are good insect models that will tell you. Do we want cooperation or conflict? You decide, then you turn to the model. So the two-step process. We have to decide what we want to do. Once we decide what we want to practice agriculture, sure, there are models. We want to practice animal husbandry, there are models. We want to increase our internet speed, there are things to learn. So two-step process. The first step is without nature. We decide our own system. Collectively, we decide. But once we decide what to do, how to do is what the insects or other parts of nature can teach us.
Okay. Tanvi has a question. How many species of honeybees are there?
In taxonomy, always the answer is depends on whom you ask. So there are basically 4 major kinds of honeybees. 2 of them are cavity nesting, 2 of them are open nesting. The cavity nesting are Apis cerana, which beekeepers keep in India and Asia, and Apis mellifera, which beekeepers keep in Europe and now also in America and Australia. So these are the 2 cavity nesting species, which are easy to domesticate. They have been domesticated. Then there are 2 major kinds of open nesting bees. Apis florea, the so-called dwarf bee, which is found only in Asia, and Apis dorsata, the very aggressive large rock bee, which we all see, that's also restricted to Asia. These are the 4 major kinds. However, taxonomies have broken these up into different kinds, whether it's subspecies or species. So today, experts will say something between 11 and 15, but not much more than that. Species of honeybees are recognized by taxonomies. As far as the layman is concerned, there are really 4 major kinds of honeybees.
Okay. So we have taken a large number of questions from Zoom. There are a large number of questions from YouTube. So I'm going to read them out. Rajendra Kumar has this question. Kindly elaborate on social immunity. What does that mean?
Yes. So this has been best studied actually it's been studied in bees, it's been studied in bumblebees, it's also been, but best studied in ants. So social immunity consists of many things. First, see, insects also like us have individual immunity. We have our own antibodies and so on. They have their own kind of internal immunity, which each individual fights disease. But when disease spreads in the colony, they have social, we call social immunity. That is, they have social mechanism to control or reduce the spread of disease. For example, diseased individuals will voluntarily stay in a corner and not mix with the individual groups. Or if he doesn't, they will actually be forced to stay in a corner. So quarantining is something which they definitely do all the time. There are other more very interesting things. They also identify, for example, honeybees, if there is a diseased larva, they identify that larva, they pick it out and throw it out. They throw it out of the colony. So they clear the colony of these things. Then they also have all kinds of things that they medicate themselves with. In honeybees, there's a very interesting finding, and this was long ago. It turns out that honeybees spend the first half of their lives working indoors, working at home, building the nest, repairing the comb, processing food, feeding larvae. The second half, they work outdoors, looking for pollen and nectar, coming back and dancing and so on. Now, the second part of life is, of course, very risky because they work outside and most of the mortality happens at that time. Typically, in a normal colony, healthy bees will graduate from indoor work to outdoor work about middle of their life. But diseased bees will start going outdoors even earlier. Now you can see there are 2 things involved here. One is by going out and spending more time earlier, you are reducing the chance of spreading your infection at home. Secondly, you are doing the more risky task, which anyway, instead of dying at home, it is better to die outside. So diseased bees will start foraging abnormally early for their age. And you can see how profound the consequences of such decisions will be. So this is being studied in great detail in ants and bees and bumblebees and so on.
Okay. So there are 2 related questions. One is from Shubhadeep Te, the other is from Preeti. With intense fertilizer modulated agricultural practice, how honeybees sense how far the foods can the honeybees sense that fertilizers and pesticides may affect their processes? Basically asking, does that affect the honeybees at all? And Preeti's question is, how do you protect insect societies from these changes and especially climate-induced changes?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So these both are very, very important questions. First is that the honeybees are very sensitive. They can detect many things, certainly presence of chemicals, and they will avoid. But if you give them no choice, and that's all they have, then of course there can be major problems for their populations. So by using insecticides indiscriminately, we are destroying a lot of honeybee colonies. And how do we protect them? Very hard to say, because now in fact, the big news all the time is honeybees are in trouble. This is the big news everywhere. Honeybees all over the world, in fact, bees in general are in trouble. And if bees are in trouble, we are in trouble. Because if bees don't pollinate our crops, then a large portion of our food supply is seriously compromised. And so it's very important for us. But why are honeybees in trouble? It turns out that the problem is quite complicated. There are two things that happen. Beekeepers, especially in industrialized countries, keep bees as if they are non-living creatures. They load hundreds of boxes of bees into a truck, drive them 1,000 kilometers tomorrow morning, and then open the truck and say pollinate. And 15 days later, they put them all in a truck, drive them somewhere else, another 1,000 kilometers, open and say pollinate. And bees don't live so close to each other. So bees have a very to describe in a very simple way, bees live in the slow lane and beekeepers want to make them live in the fast lane. And plus, because of that, their social immunity gets compromised, their individual immunity gets compromised, and they become much more vulnerable to pesticides and climate change and so on. So if you want to protect bees, it's a much more complicated thing. Not only should we give a better environment for them, like reduce pesticides and reduce climate warming, but much more than that, we have to learn how to manage bees in a way that the bees themselves do. In fact, I'm going to write an article in future. It sounds very funny. What can we learn from bees? We can learn from bees how to keep bees. This may sound very funny, but believe it or not, for the last 100 years, people have paid no attention to how bees live in the wild to decide how to keep bees in the apiaries. And only now people are learning and realizing, oh my God, I should ask the bee how she wants to live. And so now the next article one of the articles I'm going to write now is how to learn from bees, how to do beekeeping.
So interesting that you mentioned wild bees versus domestication of bees, because here is an interesting question from Aradhana. She asked, are there some differences seen between the degree of collective decision making in wild bees versus domesticated bees?
Not that we know of. The main differences are, as I said, in their ability to cope with the environment. But of course, domesticated bees are also much more productive. We make them much more productive. For example, in wild bees, they have a certain proportion. How many workers should I produce before I produce the next queen? So this partitioning between what you might call soma and germline, or workers versus queen, this we have changed. Because we want them to produce very few queens. We want them to produce lots of workers who will make a lot of honey. So those are the kinds of things that have become different in the domestic bees. As far as decision making, there seems to be no evidence so far, because some of these experiments are done with wild bees, some are done with domesticated bees. As far as we can tell, their decision making does not seem to have been affected, as far as we can tell.
Mehak has a question. Can a bee that was raised in isolation learn to dance? Is the dance ingrained or is it learned?
Completely ingrained. It's not learned at all. Only the bee learns where the tree is. but the dance is completely ingrained. An isolated bee will start dancing at that. So there is no learning component in the actual dance. That's a pure instinct.
Okay. I think I saw Dr. Krishnendu had a question. Krishnendu, if you're around. No? Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, Krishnendu, go ahead.
Yeah. So my son has a question.
Sure.
What are the species of honeybees?
The species that you find in India, the common species are Apis cerana, which we keep for honey, beekeepers. Then there's Apis florea, which is called the dwarf bee, and Apis dorsata, which is the big rock bee. In Europe and America, the most common bee is called Apis mellifera. So these are the four most common kinds of honeybees.
Okay. Next question is from Ishat Preet Singh. Ishat, you can unmute yourself and ask.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, it was really a commendable talk.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask that what will happen if we reintroduce the removed queen after the potential queen has taken the charge?
Excellent question. I'm glad you asked this because I didn't have time to tell that. Yes, we have done this experiment. So what happens is if you reintroduce the old queen, soon after the potential queen has been identified, then both old queen and new queen will agree that the old queen is better. And the new queen will voluntarily go back to becoming a worker. Now, if you wait for a long time, like few days, then both the old queen and the new queen will agree that the new queen is better and the old queen will voluntarily go and sit in a corner. The interesting thing is in between. In between, we can identify a time zone where both think they are better than the other. And that is when they fight. So we can identify a region where the old queen and new queen actually fight. They may even fight unto death. But before that, both agree that the old queen is better. After that, both agree that the new queen is better.
Next question is from Tanvi. Tanvi?
You have to unmute.
You have to unmute, Tanvi.
Yes.
Sir, I want to ask that how many live in a hive?
How many bees live in a hive?
So rarely less than 10,000. 10,000 is actually fairly small, but maybe up to 50, 60,000. In Apis florea, which are smaller colonies, you may have 10,000, but in Apis dorsata and so on, you may have 50, 60,000 bees. But all of them will be workers, only one queen, irrespective of the size, and a few male bees. Small number of male bees, one queen, and all the rest are workers.
Next is Ganga Mandan. Ganga, please ask.
Unmute.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, actually, I had a question that we have studied in the school that honeybees that they make hexagonal hives in the different a group of hives, a group of hexagonal shaped there are hives.
Yes.
And why don't the humans that they create buildings, because the hexagonal shape is very structurally strong and it also gives space.
Yes.
So why don't the humans just create those kinds of buildings in this particular shape?
Yeah, see, it depends on the premium that you put on space and on material. So also remember that the honeybees don't have multi-story structures. So we have multi-story. For example, if you build, when you want to build houses, you want to leave a lot of space outside your house. You want to have a garden, right? So you're not trying to maximally use the space. If we actually build a lot of hexagons and each of us live in a hexagon, we will have no environment. So for us, we want space outside. We don't want to minimize wastage because it's not wastage for us. We have a garden, we have a place, we have a sit out. So it's not so important for us to use maximum space. Use the space in that efficient manner. Whereas for bees, it's very important because they have to spend wax on each of those and they don't need a space outside each cell because inside the cell, either honey is stored, which doesn't need a garden, or a larva is there which is growing and which is being fed by the adult bees. She doesn't need a garden either. Whereas we all want gardens around our houses.
Next question is by Jahan Garg. Jahan, you can unmute yourself.
Yes.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, I wanted to ask you that how many species of insects are there?
Oh, how many species of insects? Wow. I can't even say that there is a PhD vacancy. You can come and find out, because I don't think we will know for many, many years. See, what is interesting is that of all the species of living organisms expected to be on Earth, less than 1% have actually been identified by scientists. That means 99% of them, 90 to 99% are unknown. The first fact. Second fact is, most species on Earth are insects. There are more insect species than any other kind, leaving aside microbes. So you can imagine how many species of insects are unknown. We know very small number of species, but most of them are unknown.
Sir, I also wanted to ask you that why the bees live in colonies, not individually.
Not in?
Not individually.
Yeah, so many insects live individually, we call them solitary insects, and some insects live in groups, we call them social insects, and by living in groups, they are able to utilize their environment better, they're able to survive better, and that's why I said social insects are ecologically the most successful and dominant individuals on Earth. And it is because they are social, they are so successful. Humans also are so successful because we are social. If we were solitary, we would never reach this level of success. So social life gives you a great advantage and leads to success.
Okay, Sehaj, you can ask your question.
Unmute.
Sir, why is honey of yellow color?
Honey is actually a mixture of nectar from different flowers. Normally, if you don't do anything special, honeybees will collect nectar from different flowers. And different flowers will have different colors. So it's a mixture of all of those. What the bees will do is they'll bring as much nectar as they can from as many flowers as they can find from different kinds of trees and different species. And then they will actually evaporate the water in them and make it very concentrated. Otherwise, if it is very dilute, fungus will grow on it, bacteria will grow on it, it'll get spoiled. So they make it very, you can see honey is very thick, no? So they evaporate the water. So the color of honey depends on which flower, from which flowers they have taken the nectar. Now, sometimes beekeepers, what they do is they force the honeybees to bring nectar only from one species of flower, only from eucalyptus, only from mango, only from neem. Then the color will be of that kind of flower. They don't add any coloring agents. The coloring is of the flower.
Next, Adya.
Unmute.
Adya, unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. I wanted to ask
that
what is the life cycle of a honeybee and the lifespan of bees?
Okay. So very generally speaking, honeybees, of course, begin their life as eggs, like a butterfly. Eggs, after a few days, will hatch into larvae, and larvae will become pupae, and then pupae will become adults. This whole period depends on the species, but maybe about a week or a little bit more. The adult bees, again, depends on the species, but live from 4 to 6 weeks, not much more than that. Adult bees live for about 4 to 6 weeks. If they live for 6 weeks, 3 weeks they work at home, 3 weeks outside. They will live for 4 weeks, 2 weeks inside, 2 weeks outside. So 1 or 2 weeks as egg, larva, pupa, and 4 to 6 weeks as adults. This is for the workers. Queens can live much longer. Queens can live for 2 years, maybe even 3 years.
Sharanya. Sharanya, you can unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
So I have a question that the honey hive is made of something. It has something inside it, or it is empty from inside. And if it is made, there is something inside the hive. Then what is present inside it?
Okay, so think of it like this. First, the honeycomb is made from wax. The honeybees themselves make wax. They drink sugar, drink nectar, drink honey, and convert it into wax, and they secrete a wax from a gland from their abdomen. Then they have a wax. On this wax, so imagine there's a sheet of wax. From both sides, they make holes, not holes, they're depressions. And these depressions are hexagonal cells. So the depression is such that from both ends, they will touch each other but not break each other. So from both sides, there will be hexagonal holes. These holes initially are empty. They are then filled either with honey or with nectar or with pollen, or the queen will lay an egg inside that. So the cells will contain either an egg, larva, or pupa, or will contain honey, or will contain pollen. Occasionally will remain empty.
Vasudev?
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Actually, in case of wasp, I was thinking, please tell me if I'm right or wrong, maybe like the selection of who will be the next queen is not made randomly. Maybe it is linked to the level of care that the eggs are getting. Is that possible?
It is unlike, okay, there are two parts to the answer. If there is, we know that if larvae get more food, they are more likely to become queens. If they get less food, they are less likely to become queens. This much we know. So there is definitely some effect of the kind of care they get as larvae, which will decide whether they can become queens or not. But whether they will become queens or not is much more complicated, because in a colony you can have only one queen. There may be many individuals who got good care, but there can be only one queen. When the queen dies, only one of the workers can become the queens. So at that level, it is not clear what will happen. It may not be random. It may be based on some things that we have not yet discovered.
Karthikeya? Karthikeya, please unmute yourself. Karthikeya is not there. Yeah, Karthikeya,
Yes,
you can go ahead and
yes.
yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir,
Good
I
afternoon.
want to ask that, sir, why bee makes wax, and what is the importance of the binding property of wax in their life?
Different insects may use different things to make their nests. Bees manufacture wax, and it seems to be a very convenient way of making their nest. I can't say why ants don't make wax and why bees make wax. This is something we cannot answer. But wax is very convenient for making these, because wax can be made into a mold, and in that you can make these hexagonal cells. So in a way, wax is actually much more convenient than when like termites or some ants make their nest from soil. They actually have to produce special chemicals to bind the soil particles together. Okay, so that's an extra step. In the case of wax, you don't need that. So the wax starts as a lump of wax into which you start excavating these hexagonal cells, and you can then use it. So it's a different kind of material. So in evolution, some have taken this path and some have taken that path, and we will never be able to say why ants didn't make wax and why honeybees don't use soil. But that's the question we cannot answer. But we can see that there are advantages and disadvantages of both these kinds of things.
Okay, sir, but what is the importance of binding property?
In the case of wax, you don't need anything. That's a nice thing about wax. So imagine you have a lump of wax, and then you simply excavate hexagonal cells on either side. You don't need to bind it. It starts with a lump of wax. Whereas in the case of soil, if the ants or termites collect the soil particles, they will have to bind them together. So they produce special secretions which actually glue these soil particles together. Then extra step is required for insects that use soil to make nests. In the case of paper wasps, many extra steps are required, because all they do is they get cellulose fibers. From cellulose fiber, they have to make paper. So there is a much more complicated route of manufacture. So each one has its own complexity, but each one has its own advantages and disadvantages. The other general principle in nature we must understand is that if everybody is doing something, then it is better for you to do something different. For example, if everybody is making wax, there's a lot of soil, so you can use soil. If everybody is using soil, you make paper. So often in nature, species evolve things which others have not, so that they don't have too much competition from them. So for example, if some species are always going to this kind of nectar, I will go to another one to avoid competition. So to avoid competition, many different strategies are invented by species.
Okay, I know there are going to be a large number of questions and we can go on like this till the evening. So in the interest of time, maybe I'll take another 2-3 questions and we'll wind up.
Okay.
The others who have not gotten a chance to ask your questions, please do not despair. Email us or email Professor Gadagkar your questions.
Yes.
You will surely get your answers.
Yes.
Okay. So maybe another 2-3 questions and then we will wind up in the interest of time. Okay. Next is Siddharth. Siddharth, unmute.
Yes. Hello, sir. The question I want to ask is, if there is no difference between the worker and the queen externally in Rhopalydia marginata, then how do the wasps of the host colony identify the queen of the alien colony? Do they wait until she lays eggs, or do they observe behavioral pattern?
Sir, we can't hear you. Just 1 minute. Some problem with the audio. Yeah, now we can hear you. Yeah. No, not anymore.
Yes, now it's okay.
Yeah.
A train goes by from time to time outside my window, at which time you cannot hear me, I cannot hear you. So at that time I usually mute. So yes, I didn't hear the question. I didn't hear that question.
Do you want to repeat the question?
Before the next train.
Siddharth, can you repeat the question?
Able to.
Yeah, now we can hear you. Go ahead. Ask.
Yes.
Okay.
What I wanted to ask you is, if there is no difference between the worker and the queen in Rhopalydia marginata, then how do the wasps of the host colony identify the queen of the alien colony? Do they wait until she lays eggs, or do they observe behavioral patterns?
Okay. No, in this case, they actually smell it out. So there is difference in the smell, but this difference is after they become queen. Before they become queen, there is no difference. So that means anybody can become a queen. But once you become a queen, you have your own queen smell. And then others can identify you through the smell.
Okay. Sumer Parihar. Yeah, please go ahead.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning.
Sir, what are the characteristics of a news site where honeybee honeybee democracy?
Okay, so this has
dancing depends on what?
Yeah, this has been very well studied in the European honeybee, not so much in the Asian bees. So the first thing is that the bees, this has been again been studied better in the cavity nesting bees. In the cavity nesting bees, the most important thing is the volume of the cavity. If the volume is too much, they won't be able to do temperature control. If it is too little, there is not enough space. So the volume they're very particular about, not being too big, not being too small. And experiments have shown that bees can measure the volume by actually running around on the walls of the comb. They actually measure what is the volume. So they are quite fussy about the volume. They will reject very large cavities and very small cavities. That is one. Second thing is the cavity should have a narrow entrance, not a very big entrance. Now that entrance should be in a particular place so that it does not, rainwater doesn't go inside or predators cannot come inside. So the entrance is also important. Then the height from the ground of that cavity, because these cavities are usually in dead trees, but sometimes also in rocks. If it is too close to the ground, all kinds of predators will disturb the colonies and eat them up. So they want it to be high up above the ground. So, and then very often, whether they are south facing or east facing or north facing will matter depending on which part of the world you are in, because they don't want direct sunlight to come inside. So they look at the volume of the cavity, height from the ground, the size and position of the entrance to the cavity, as well as which direction it is facing. All of these they take into consideration before they decide which one to choose. And in fact, it is based on these that the strength of the dance will change, and therefore their decision will. What is interesting is in most cases studied, honeybees finally end up not only going to a single new place, but usually the best available. And the way Tom Seeley and others do these experiments is they provide artificially, they provide the bees with 5 or 6 different potential cavities with different characteristics. They know. And then they ask which is the best one, and then see whether the bees always go to the best one. Nearly always, by their democratic debate, they will not only choose a single one, but they will choose the best.
Okay, last few questions. Okay, I will try and go to younger people and those who have not yet asked the questions. Okay, first is Pritish. Pritish.
Sir, I want to ask that how many flowers does it take to make honey, and how do honey varieties get their taste?
Oh, from each flower, the bees get really very small quantity of honey. And bees can store several kilograms of honey in them. So it really involves hundreds of bees making hundreds of trips to hundreds of flowers to gather this honey. So it's a very laborious process. As I said, normally bees will take honey from different flowers and mix them up. But if we want, we can make sure that they visit only one kind of flower. But that we have to do specifically. They will mix up from different kinds of flowers.
Okay, next is Harpahul. Harpahul Kaur.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I want to ask that when there is no season for flowers to bloom, how honeybees can make honey?
Yeah, so it depends now on which part of the world. So, for example, in Europe and many parts of North America and so on, it really gets not only no flowers, but it is completely cold and there's snow everywhere. So during that period, what the bees do is that they don't make any more, they don't lay any more eggs, they don't collect any more honey. In fact, bees store honey for their use in times of food shortage. They don't store it for us. We steal from them. As long as we steal a little bit, it's okay. If we steal too much, it's a problem. But they make honey for such times when there is no food available in the environment. They will use that during that period and survive during that period. But if the environment is really harsh and really long, like a 3-month winter with snow, then not only will they use that nectar, but they will stop all activities. In fact, it is known that the bees will tightly huddle with each other, with the queen in the middle, hundreds of bees all around, and they will drink honey which they have stored for themselves and produce body heat and share body heat and literally huddle together. Even then, there will be some bees in the outermost part of this cluster. They will die. And then the next layer will die. And finally, by the end of 3 months of winter, the queen and a very small number of bees may have survived, the rest may have died. In many cases, the queen may also have died. But if the environment is not so hard, then they get by using the stored honey, as long as you have not stolen all of it. It is also true that for some species like Apis dorsata, our rock bees, they will actually change their location. If there is no food here, they'll go somewhere else in search of food. They'll shift their entire hive. They will build a new home in a new place where there may be food available. If there is seasonal variation in food available, they'll keep on migrating in search of where food is available.
Okay, Raghav, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I wanted to ask what is the role of king termite in a termite colony?
The king termite only contributes sperm to the queen termite, and queen termite produces eggs. The work is not done by them. The work is done by the workers. In many species, the workers are really the very young ones. All the work is done by the workers, and the king and queen only produce children. They don't do any work.
Okay. Next question is Ehsan Mohali.
Unmute.
Ehsan, you can unmute. No? You're unable to unmute. Ehsan, can you then?
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Now you can.
Good.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So my question was that can and do bees ever lie and cheat when communicating with their colony? So say, for example, when you're out finding a new site for your colony, you said that the dance is proportional to how good the site is. So
Yes.
have bees ever dance strongly when they know that their site is not as good? And how are liars and cheaters dealt with in the colony?
As far as we know, they never lie about these things. But interestingly, they don't lie. That is a straightforward answer. But very interesting thing is that we can make them lie to see what happens. And the way we make them lie is they tell the truth, but they have false information. So there are some people have done experiments where the bees don't have the correct information. They have the wrong information. So honestly, they will tell what information they have. But so they don't lie. So in other words, they tell the truth even when the truth is wrong, because they don't know what is the correct truth. So to that extent, they will tell the truth, even though it is actually wrong information. They don't lie. But in general, if you are interested, there are many situations where many animal species lie and cheat in other situations. Okay, so we know many examples where animals lie about their health, they lie about their dominant status, they lie about their strength, they lie about many things. But in this particular case, since everybody has the same goal, everybody is interested in finding a new place as quickly as possible and the best possible place. So there is complete convergence of interests. So they don't lie. But when there is advantage in lying in other situations, other animals, we have seen that they lie. They can lie.
Okay. Last question from Hartriman Singh. Hartriman, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, sir.
I know there are other questions, but all of you have asked at least once. So I'm going to let Hartriman ask.
Sir, I wanted to ask that there is a species of moths known as rosy maple moths, and they're always pink and yellow in color. Sir, why are they're only pink and yellow in color and not some other color?
Oh, very difficult to say. Different animals have different colors. Some of these are adaptations to the environment.
Sir, we can't hear you. Your voice is muted. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll repeat my answer. So that is a very difficult question to answer. Different animals have different colors. Sometimes this is camouflage from the environment. Sometimes this is simply inherited from their ancestors. In many cases, we don't know why they are yellow and not brown, etc. But for the particular wasp you are talking about, you should ask Dr. Ruchira Sen, from whom I mentioned in this talk. She is the expert on these wasps, and she will tell you. And if she tells you, you please tell me what she said.
Okay. I know there are a lot of other questions. I'm sorry to disappoint you people, but we have to end at some point in the interest of time. So I would like to thank Professor Gadagkar for this fantastic talk. As always, lots to learn, thoroughly enjoyable, catering to an audience from directors and deputy directors to 4-year-olds. Fantastic job. Thank you so much. This was really nice. I would like to thank our partners, the Punjab State Council for Science and Technology, in helping us organize this. Behind the scenes, many people have worked to make sure that everything runs fine. Our computer center, Garima, Kuljit, thank you so much for handling the last minute glitches. One colleague who has been doing this very quietly, very efficiently is Amit. So Amit, thank you so much. Most importantly, I thank all the school children who joined today and all our students who joined today. It was very, very enjoyable. Thank you. Please send in your questions. We'll make sure that your questions get answered. Thank you. See you.